Good afternoon. Today we're going to be talking about my recommendations for what to buy in Lord of the Rings LCG. This will be from the point of view of newer players who maybe picked up the revised core set and are wondering where to go next, wondering which quests, which adventure packs are fun, which ones could be skipped without missing much, which expansions are good value, which are not. We'll be talking about the different goals in the game that new players have. You might have some players coming in who want to see all the storylines. You might see some players coming in who just want to see some of the storylines, who just want to buy certain adventure packs and not others, and maybe watch videos on YouTube for the ones that they're not going to pick up. You may have players coming in who have a gaming group that plays Lord of the Rings LCG and you want to build a good deck so that you can participate in that. We'll talk about some of these goals and how to accomplish these goals, and we'll give my recommendations for which order to buy which adventure packs and expansions in. I have on the screen the revised or the core set and the first cycle that was released for the game called the Shadows of Mirkwood cycle. It's worth talking about because I don't recommend this cycle. I do recommend the core set. That is an excellent place to start if you want to get into the game. It was recently re-released, relatively recently, back, actually it's been a year now, but that's still relatively recent, relative to when the game first came out. And so you can find the Lord of the Rings revised edition, the core set, fairly easily. However, when it comes to the first cycle, the Passage of Mirkwood cycle, I would not recommend this cycle for newer players, and the reason is because the quests are not particularly fun nor thematic, nor are the cards that you get in this cycle very good, at least not for very long. So the cycle covers the story of, as you see there, the hunt for Gollum. And the quests are hit or miss. The hunt for Gollum and the conflict at the Carrock are pretty good quests. A journey to Rosgobel is interesting. It's a healing-focused quest, which didn't happen very often in this game. In solo, it's not that fun, though. It can be quite frustrating. The Hills of Emmenwheel is just boring. The Dead Marshes is quite short, especially in solo, and Return to Mirkwood is brutally punishing and not terribly rewarding in solo play. Now, if you're playing with a group, are these quests going to be better and more balanced? Yeah, they are, but there's nothing particularly exciting about them. These aren't going to be quests, in my opinion, that you're going to come back to over and over. The cards in the adventure packs are certainly nothing to speak of. So while I do recommend the core set, I do not necessarily recommend the adventure packs for new players as a good place to start, unless you are a completionist aiming to play through progression style, or you're a collector and you want to have all the adventure packs in the game. In that case, you could pick these up, but there's nothing exceptional or special about them in my opinion. They introduce the mechanics of Lord of the Rings LCG, but you could probably skip them and be just fine. So we're going to move on and talk about the other cycles of the game, which I believe are more worthwhile. In my opinion, the Return to Mirkwood cycle for new players can easily be skipped without missing much, and if you are interested, I have videos of them on my channel, playthroughs of them, if you don't mind spoilers. That will allow you to get a feel for the quests and what I'm talking about. But it is my opinion and my recommendation that new players simply skip buying these adventure packs after buying the core set. So let's talk about cycles of expansion and adventure packs that I do recommend. The first expansion and adventure pack cycle I would recommend for newer players after getting the revised core set is Khazad-dum. In my opinion, this is a much more, it's more fun. The quests are more fun in my opinion, and the cards are much, much better. In particular, I have on the right my opinions on the standout adventure packs for the cycle. The Watcher in the Water, Foundations of Stone, and Shadow and Flame. These are the best of the cycle in my opinion. If I were a newer player and not playing as a completionist, we should talk at this point about what your goals in the game are. Are you a player that wants to purchase a whole cycle or nothing at all? Or are you comfortable picking up just the best adventure packs and leaving the others unbought? Because if you pick up this whole cycle, it depends on if you're playing solo or multiplayer. If you're playing multiplayer and your intention is to play dwarves, you will need the Return to Mirkwood adventure pack. I previously mentioned that I don't recommend them. Well, there's an exception, and that exception is if you want to play dwarves, because Dying Ironfoot, an absolutely essential hero for a dwarves deck, comes in Return to Mirkwood, and the rest of the dwarves come in Khazad-dum, the Khazad-dum expansion. Now, whether you want to play dwarves or not probably depends on whether you're playing multiplayer or solo. If you're playing solo and you're a new player, I don't recommend that you pick up dwarves. I don't find them especially powerful. I don't find the quests of Khazad-dum particularly good. In particular, Flight from Moria can be quite frustrating. Into the Pit and the 7th level are okay, but they're not quests I would return to repeatedly. The Red Horn Gate can be very frustrating. The road to Rivendell kind of reminds me of the Hills of Emmenwheel, and that it's kind of boring. And the same for the Long Dark. So if you're not a completionist, you can leave the Khazad-dum expansion, the Red Horn Gate, the Road to Rivendell, and the Long Dark adventure packs unbought and not miss much. You can just watch videos of those if you're curious. I don't find those particularly enjoyable. Now, the Watcher in the Water I do find very enjoyable. The Watcher in the Water has a decent hero, Lord Aragorn, and the Watcher in the Water is a classic encounter from the Lord of the Rings movies and book, and I really enjoyed playing through this quest. I like it a lot. I would return to it. Foundations of Stone is a branching paths quest, which I found very enjoyable, and that adventure pack has one of the best heroes in the game, Spirit Glorfindel. And Shadow and Flame is a classic encounter, another classic Lord of the Rings encounter with the Balrog, and has, to this day, one of the best heroes in the game, Elrond, with Vilya. And Foundations of Stone and Shadow and Flame, together those two heroes, remain two of the best heroes in the game, even after all the cards in the game have come out, and therefore those are excellent adventure packs for newer players to pick up. This cycle in general escalates in difficulty pretty well. If you went from Khazad-dum, those quests are relatively easy. The Red Horn Gate is a little more challenging, but not in a fun way. It's challenging in a kind of frustrating way, in that you have to wait for locations to come out of the encounter deck, and there's not much that you can do about it. The Road to Rivendell is very forgiving in its difficulty, as is the Long Dark. The Watcher in the Water is more challenging. The Foundations of Stone is longer, but not necessarily that difficult, and Shadow and Flame is an appropriate challenge for an end of the cycle quest. So Khazad-dum is where I would start. The Khazad-dum cycle is where I would start for a newer player. I'd skip Return to Mirkwood, and if you're a completionist, grab the expansion, all the adventure packs. If you're only looking to grab the best ones, those are, in my opinion, the Watcher in the Water, Foundations of Stone, and Shadow and Flame. And you can skip the Khazad-dum expansion, the Red Horn Gate, Road to Rivendell, and the Long Dark, as if you are buying them not as a collector, just as a player who wants to see the best content the game has to offer. I believe you will find those adventure packs and the expansion a little disappointing relative to the other expansions and adventure packs that the game has to offer. So, after having completed what you want to from the Khazad-dum cycle, where I would go from there is trying to pick up the Hobbit expansions. There's 2 boxes to the Hobbit expansions, Overhill and Underhill, and on the doorstep. Of the 2 of those, on the doorstep is the better expansion, in my opinion. However, a note about that, there are some quite good cards in the Overhill and Underhill expansion. So the Overhill and Underhill expansion has better player cards, but on the doorstep has better quests, in my opinion. Overhill and Underhill has We Must Away, Ere Break of Day, Over the Misty Mountains Grim, and Dungeons Deep and Caverns Dim. Now, We Must Away, Ere Break of Day is very similar to a quest that has come before it, which is Conflict at the Carrock. I don't recommend getting both of those for sure. I already didn't recommend the Shadows of Mirkwood cycle. But if you did already play Conflict at the Carrock, you've basically already played We Must Away, Ere Break of Day. And Over the Misty Mountains Grim is, well, it's not that enjoyable in my opinion. It's thematic, but for me, I find the quests in On the Doorstep to be much more interesting. And Overhill and Underhill also has the Dungeons Deep and Caverns Dim, which is quite a frustrating quest. I don't really enjoy playing that quest at all. It's fun, but the riddle mechanic in it is just kind of frustrating at times. So I wouldn't recommend Overhill and Underhill at all, except for the fact that it has some very good, strong, and fun cards, especially if you're playing dwarves. If you're playing dwarves, Feely and Keely are very good cards. And if you're not playing dwarves, Hero Bjorn is very powerful. A very good Tale in this expansion is also a very good player card. And there's an ally version of Gandalf, a second version of him, which is, it doesn't see much play, to be honest, especially not in multiplayer, because if you play Gandalf, the version that comes in Overhill and Underhill, and you're in multiplayer, you're going to be Gandalf blocking your teammates because they're not going to be able to play their versions of Gandalf, which just hang around for a round while you've got your version on the table just kind of sitting there, and he'll make their decks, if they've included the traditional Gandalf who comes in the core set and just hangs around for one round or one phase if you've used Sneak Attack. That may be irritating to your teammates if they can't play their Gandalfs because yours is sitting on the table. So that version of Gandalf is better in solo play. Even in solo play, I didn't use it much in my progression series. It is fun, but I didn't use it much. Bjorn the Hero is very good though, but the quests are just not that good to me. Now on the doorstep, those quests are quite enjoyable. On the doorstep quests are Flies and Spiders, which isn't that great, but the Lonely Mountain and the Battle of Five Armies are very good quests. Very good and interesting quests, in particular the Lonely Mountain, with the burgle mechanic, the stealing treasures from Smog, and especially if you can get a hold of the print-on-demand, the Battle of Lake Town, which I think is one of the better print-on-demand quests. That would go well with the On the Doorstep expansion. If you're thinking of buying a limited amount, if you're buying just for the cards, I think you could pick up, I could recommend the Hobbit Overhill and Underhill if you intend to also pick up Khazad-dum and return to Mirkwood and play dwarves. If you don't, I would not recommend the Hobbit Overhill and Underhill, either for the cards or the quest. On the Doorstep, I would recommend for the quality quests. The cards are nothing to speak of if you don't play dwarves, though. So if you are only intending to buy adventure packs or expansions which have both strong cards and strong quests, you can avoid the Hobbit Saga, in my opinion, because neither of these expansions fit that bill with both quality cards and quality quests. If you're in just for quality or interesting cards, Hero Bjorn is one of my favorites from the Overhill and Underhill, and A Very Good Tale is one of my most played cards in my Outland Swarm deck. But the quests are nothing to speak of. If you're in the game, if you're buying cards just for the quests and you don't particularly care about the player cards at this point, I could recommend on the doorstep. The cards are nothing special, but the quests are quite enjoyable. Moving on, the next cycle that I recommend is the Sands of Harad cycle. Now, this was actually the 7th cycle released in the game, but in my opinion, it is better for newer players than any of the other cycles because it's relatively self-contained. The Sands of Harad expansion contained hero versions of Legolas and Gimli that are not incredibly powerful. However, the quests in this expansion are at a difficulty where not incredibly powerful is sufficient to beat the quests. When you are introducing new players to the game, you don't want to throw new players into the hardest quests and the hardest cycles right away, at least not without giving them appropriately powerful cards. Now, FFG has re-released the core set, the revised core set, and the next cycle that they chose to re-release is Shadows of Angmar. That is an incredibly difficult cycle. That is not one I would recommend for new players at all. If you are thinking to yourself, I've picked up the revised core set and I'm thinking of getting some more cards, and the next revised core set released is Shadows of Angmar, and therefore that seems like a logical place to start. It is not, in my opinion, because those quests are very, very, very difficult. Particularly the battle for Khazad-dum, which is in the top 5 most difficult in the entire game. And the cards are not of sufficient power to enable you to beat the quests. The cycle focuses on the Dunedain, and the Dunedain are fun, but never particularly powerful. The Sands of Harad cycle, in particular, the one adventure pack that I have singled out of this cycle, the Mumakil, gives 3 of the most powerful allies in the game. Allies that will see play in every elite deck until the end of the game's life. Those allies would be Jubiar and Firial, and to a lesser extent Yazan. But Jubiar and Firial will see play in every elite deck until the end of time, it seems, because they are very, very, very good allies. The Sands of Harad is a very fun expansion. It's a very gentle expansion for newer players, as the difficulty isn't that high. And for newer players or more casual players, it gives additional versions of Legolas and Gimli, and in particular, these are versions that work very well together, and therefore they are quite fun and quite thematic to play. So, for newer players, I found the Sands of Harad very enjoyable and very gentle, more so, than, in my opinion, than any of the other expansions. And the Mumakil adventure pack will give you access to very, very powerful allies. As for the other adventure packs, for completionists, yes, if you would like to have the entire cycle or none of the adventure packs at all. Otherwise, just pick up the Mumakil. If you are newer and you want the gentle quests and the very fun and thematic Legolas and Gimli contained in the expansion, pick up the expansion. If you're just going for the absolute best cards, pick up just the Mumakil adventure pack as Legolas and Gimli in the Sands of Harad. While fun, they are not insanely powerful. They are fun and they are definitely playable, but they are not going to be in many elite decks. So if you're just going for the very best cards in the game, the Mumakil adventure pack is a must-have. The quest in the Mumakil is nothing to speak of. Not one of the best quests in the game. The Watcher in the Water and Shadow and Flame are among the best quests in the game, in my opinion. None of the quests in the Sands of Harad are among the best quests in the game, but the recommendation comes from the Sands of Harad expansion being relatively self-contained in that the cards used in the expansion are fun and can be used in all the quests of the expansion. and therefore it is an appropriate expansion to recommend to newer players, in my opinion, for the quests, but not for the cards. The Mumakil Adventure Pack is the adventure pack I recommend for the powerful cards it contains. Again, 3 of the most powerful allies in the game in one adventure pack makes it a must-have. Next up on the recommendations is going to be the Grey Havens cycle. Now, the Grey Havens cycle is the introduction for the players to the sailing mechanic, a mechanic I found very enjoyable. The Grey Havens expansion also contains the Noldor cards. Círdan the Shipwright is a very powerful hero, and you have synergistic cards for the Noldor, such as To the Sea, Sailor of Lune. The Noldor synergy is a very enjoyable one. The difficulty on the Grey Havens quests is very forgiving, and the sailing mechanic is very fun, but not overwhelmingly difficult, and this makes this quest cycle very appropriate for newer players to buy before cycles that have much higher difficulty and are higher on the frustration scale. The standouts in this cycle, the Grey Havens cycle, aside from the expansion, which I do recommend, are Flight of the Stormcaller, which is a sailing quest and has Hero Denethor, a leadership version of Hero Denethor, which remains to this day one of the best heroes in the game and is a hero I highly recommend. I would put Flight of the Stormcaller in my top 5 adventure packs to buy. Well, maybe top 10, but definitely top 10, possibly top 5 adventure packs to buy, because it contains an elite hero and a very fun quest. It's up there with Shadow and Flame for that reason. Foundations of Stone is also quite good and up there for that reason. Flight of the Stormcaller, Foundations of Stone, Shadow and Flame I would rank together because of the elite heroes contained in the adventure pack and the enjoyability of the quest. I enjoy the sailing mechanic. I consider it relatively appropriate for new players because it is not overwhelmingly difficult, and so I can recommend that adventure pack unequivocally because it will increase the power available to you. In addition to Hero Denethor, leadership version of him, you also get a new ally version of Glorfindel. In fact, I think this is the only ally version of Glorfindel, a spirit version, and that is a very powerful ally. I would recommend this adventure pack just for Denethor alone, but when you get Glorfindel in addition, this is an absolute must-have Flight of the Stormcaller adventure pack. Temple of the Deceived. That adventure pack has a very unique mechanic, a quest with a very unique mechanic. It gets laid out as, it gets set up as a map. The locations get laid out in a map of an island that you need to explore. And I found this mechanic very unique and enjoyable. The cards are nothing to speak of. So if you're not interested in buying adventure packs that don't have particularly good cards but do have very interesting quests, I can recommend Temple of the Deceived. I would put it in the same category as the On the Doorstep box of the Hobbit. The quest is very enjoyable. The cards are nothing to speak of. I would not put the Temple of the Deceived in the top 5 with Foundations of Stone, Shadow and Flame, and Flight of the Stormcaller. Those would be my top 3 that we've looked at so far. Plus the Mumakil would be in the top 4 if you count just the cards. I don't remember the quest being especially memorable, but Flight of the Stormcaller, Foundations of Stone, Shadow and Flame in the top 5 for sure, with the Mumakil added if you just take into consideration that it has 3 of the most powerful allies in the game. A Storm on Koba's Haven. That is another sailing quest. and it falls in the same category as Temple of the Deceived. It is a fun quest, but it does not have especially good cards. I just enjoy the sailing quests. I consider them well balanced, fun, and interesting, and therefore I recommend them. Temple of the Deceived and Storm on Cobus Haven, they're going in the same category as On the Doorstep, though, in that the quests are very fun, and I'm recommending them for that reason, but the cards are nothing to speak of. Now, next up, we're going to talk about the Lord of the Rings Saga expansions. If you've followed my recommendations for buying so far, you've likely got the cards now to tackle some of these quests. This is the best of the quests in terms of the storyline, because to me, it's just very cool being able to play in a card game through the story of the Lord of the Rings movies, starting in the Shire and going all the way to Mount Doom. And in addition, the cards in these Saga boxes are really, really good. Particularly the 4 that I have on the right side of the screen, which we'll talk about more. But these Saga boxes I highly recommend, even though they are expensive. They are very, very enjoyable. Now let's talk about the 4 that I have on the right side. The Black Riders, the first of them. This is the Hobbit Saga box. The quests are enjoyable. The cards are not especially powerful. The quests are very thematic in that they strongly encourage you to play the cards in the Saga box, the Hobbit cards, which specialize in low threat and kind of secretive behavior. After the expansion, well, the cards aren't especially powerful. They are fun. The Hobbit archetype remains fun all through the life cycle of the game. It's never particularly powerful, in my opinion. But it is a lot of fun, and so the Black Riders I'm recommending as a fun expansion, similar to the Sands of Harad. Buy it to have fun, not to increase the power of your collection dramatically. But it's fun, and it's relatively self-contained in that the cards in the expansion can be used to defeat the expansion, and in fact we're encouraged to do this, which makes the expansion a lot of fun. Some of the later Saga expansions are much more powerful, though, and we'll talk about those next. The Road Darkens gives us the hero version of Gandalf, one of the best heroes in the game, a very, very unique and enjoyable hero to play, and so I highly recommend him. I recommend the Road Darkens expansion for that reason. The quests are okay. I wouldn't say there's anything particularly special about them. I enjoyed the quest from the Black Riders box more. The main reason that I enjoyed playing the Road Darkens expansion was because of the hero version of Gandalf. He's a lot of fun. He's a very good hero, and I recommend this expansion for that reason alone. The Treason of Saruman gives us Treebeard, Hero Treebeard, one of my favorite heroes and a very strong hero. Gives us Theoden, a very fun hero, not an especially powerful one. Gives us new ally versions of Gimli and Legolas, as well as an ally version of Quickbeam, one of the Ents. And Gandalf's mount, Shadowfax. Some very good player cards, and the quests, the Uruk-hai is nothing to speak of, but Helm's Deep is a very, very good quest. I very much enjoyed that quest. It was very memorable for me. And the combination of the fun heroes and very powerful heroes, Treebeard, to a lesser extent Theoden, and then the ally version of Legolas in particular is quite good. And the quest Helm's Deep are the reasons why I recommend the Treason of Saruman Saga expansion. Now, if you were buying them in order, you would come to the Land of Shadow. I see no particular reason to recommend buying this except for completionists. It gives heroes Damrod and Faramir, not Faragorn, Faramir, that are okay, but nothing to write home about. The quests, the Passage of the Marshes, Journey to the Crossroads, Shelob's Lair, they're certainly not bad. They don't stick in the memory either. It's worth getting all of the Saga expansions just to play campaigns through them. That will give you very, very strong cards, very good replayability. They are, I would say, among the most marketable of the expansions and the adventure packs if you're trying to get new players into the game and you want them to get excited about the game. Playing through the Lord of the Rings Saga, the campaign version, would be an excellent way to do that. For that, it would be quite expensive because you'll need all the Saga expansions, and some of them could be a little hard to track down. So if you're buying the cards for that reason, I'd recommend the Land of Shadow, but otherwise, I think you can safely avoid it and just watch videos of the quests. Flame of the West contains two of the best heroes in the game, Tactics Eowyn and Spirit Baragond. In my opinion, Flame of the West is a must-have expansion for any serious Lord of the Rings LCG player because I have Tactics Eowyn as the best hero in the game, and she is in that expansion. The quests, the Passing of the Grey Company, the Siege of Gondor, the Battle of Pelennor Fields, very thematic. I enjoyed the quests. The difficulty is not terribly high. But Tactics Eowyn alone is a reason to recommend the Flame of the West very highly. And that's why it's included on this buying list. And the ally in the expansion, Gonberry Gon, is quite good as well. He makes his way into a lot of elite decks. But Tactics Eowyn and Spirit Baragond are exceptional heroes, among the very best in the game. And they are both in the Flame of the West expansion. This would be the first must-buy expansion for me, from the standpoint of getting the best cards in the game. The quests are good, but I would put the Flame of the West expansion in the same category as the Mumakil. The quests are okay, but the real reason you get these expansion or this adventure pack is for the cards. They don't make it into the top 5 combined, which I would say you have to have both very good cards and very good quests to do that. And for me, that's Watcher in the Water, Foundations of Stone, Shadow and Flame, Flight of the Stormcaller. Maybe Watcher in the Water to a lesser extent because Lord Aragorn isn't that good. Probably just Foundations of Stone, Shadow and Flame, and Flight of the Stormcaller. My top 3 that we've gone over so far. But the Mumakil and the Flame of the West would definitely make it in there if you were going off of cards alone. So, the Mountain of Fire, that needs its own discussion. The cards in it are nothing special, but it does have two of the most memorable and difficult quests in the game, the Black Gate Opens and Mount Doom. Those two quests combined have very interesting mechanics. Mount Doom remains one of the most difficult quests in the game, in my opinion. My top 3 would probably be Escape from Dol Guldur, Mount Doom, and the Battle of Cairn Doom in terms of difficulty, with possibly one of the quests in A Shadow in the East worth mentioning in the same breath. You also get in the Mountain of Fire Eladan and Elrohir ally versions, and if you like playing Noldor, I would consider those cards very important. They upgrade the power of that deck. And you get an ally version of Rosy Cotton, so the cards are nothing to sneeze at, but there's nothing particularly exceptional about its heroes. But if you're buying the Mountain of Fire, you're buying it for the Black Gate Opens and the Mount Doom quest, most likely. Expect a very high degree of difficulty from those quests. Very, very difficult quests. And therefore not suitable for newer players. And that's the reason why the Lord of the Rings Saga expansions don't rank higher on this list of things to buy, because going from forgiving difficulty to difficult, and the Mountain of Fire is as unforgiving in its difficulty as any expansion or adventure pack in the game. The next cycle on the list is going to be the Wilds of Rovanian. The reason why I like this cycle above some of the others is the Dale cards. I enjoy Dale as an archetype. I think it's a good one to recommend for newer players because, once again, you can build, it's self-contained. You can build a deck using the cards from this expansion and then beat the quests of the expansion. The Dale decks have good power. They're not elite decks, but they're fun and they have good power, and that's why I recommend this cycle. Bard, Son of Brand, and Brand, Son of Bane are good heroes, and unfortunately, some of the Dale cards got spread out over multiple adventure packs. And so to really have full access to Dale, you have to buy, multiple things, which is unfortunate. Standouts in this cycle in terms of the adventure packs for me are Fire in the Night and The Fate of Wilderland. And the reason why those are chosen is Fire in the Night. Well, let's talk about Fate of the Wilderland first. That has the hero version of Radagast, who is a very fun and powerful hero. May even be an elite hero with his 2 willpower, 2 attack, 3 shields, 4 health, and the ability to pay for creatures from any sphere. When you combine him with the card from Fire in the Night, Giant Bear, which is one of my favorite allies in the game for elite decks, this is quite strong and quite fun to play. I enjoy Hero Radagast quite a bit, and the creatures deck quite a bit. It's a lot of fun, and that's why I have these as standouts, but you will note that they're kind of lower down the list, below the Saga expansions from Lord of the Rings, below Grey Havens, below the Mumakil, or below Khazad-dum adventure packs. They're fun. They're not especially high on the list, which means I'd have them as, maybe I'll get to them if I want additional content after I've gone through the Saga expansions, the Grey Havens, Sands of Harad, but I wouldn't consider it super important, and if you just kind of said to yourself, I think I'll skip it, I wouldn't blame you at all, and I wouldn't say you'd be missing that much. The Dale deck is a lot of fun to play. It's not essential. None of these adventure packs or the expansion in the Wilds of Rovanian cycle are essential, the way that something like Flight of the Stormcaller, the Mumakil, Shadow and Flame, Flame of the West. So far, all the cycles we've looked at have had something in there that I considered absolutely essential to buy for any serious Lord of the Rings LCG player. The Wilds of Rovanian does not have anything I would consider essential. Absolutely essential. Some fun cards to have, some nice cards to have. Giant Bear, to be honest, is probably the best card in the whole cycle, in my opinion. Contained in the Fire in the Night adventure pack, but if you buy it just for that, it's a real nice card to have. It's not going to significantly upgrade the power of your deck, like, for example, something like Leadership Denethor would, or Elrond with Villia would. But it's certainly a nice card to have for elite decks. In the last cycle we're going to talk about before we get into what I would call the elite cycles, the cycles with the most difficult quests, or the cycles with the highest difficulty. The last one we're going to talk about before that is the Voice of Isengard. Now you can make a case for the Voice of Isengard being higher than the Wilds of Rovanian because of the strength of its cards. I didn't find the Voice of Isengard quest to be particularly enjoyable. The Dunland Trap and Celebrimbor's Secret contain very powerful and very fun cards. But the quests I found a little bit frustrating in many cases. And in the case of like the 3 trials, quite difficult. The Voice of Isengard contains Saruman and Grima, ally version of Saruman, and a hero version of Grima. The mechanic introduced in this expansion is the Doomed mechanic. That's nothing new. We've seen Doomed before on player cards repeatedly. This introduces the idea of putting Doomed on. We've seen Doomed on encounter cards previously. This introduces the idea of putting Doomed on player cards as a good thing. I found that mechanic frustrating and not particularly powerful. Grima can be quite powerful in the right deck. Not thematic, but quite powerful. But I didn't find it particularly fun to play this cycle. Until you get to, well, the Dunland Trap has Celeborn and the Sylvan archetype, and that is quite fun. I enjoyed Sylvans quite a bit, and you need the Dunland Trap adventure pack for that, at a minimum, because it has Celeborn, and he's extremely important for the Sylvan synergy. And Celebrimbor's Secret has Galadriel and her ring Nenya, and that is a very powerful card. The 2 of them together are very powerful, and they are the reason why I consider those 2 adventure packs standouts. I wouldn't necessarily consider either of them must-haves, unless you want to play Sylvans, in which case I would consider the Dunland Trap a must-have, of course. Galadriel's not essential for any particular deck, but she's a lot of fun. I'd rank her right around the same category as Círdan from the Grey Havens expansion. But they're quite good, quite fun. Nonetheless, you could skip them and not really miss out on that much, which is something I couldn't say about like an adventure pack like the Mumakil, the ones I've talked about ad nauseum before, Flight of the West, etc. These bottom 2 expansion cycles, Wilds of Rovanian, Voice of Isengard, they have some fun concepts. Dale decks are fun, Sylvan decks are fun, but they're not going to rank as highly as the others I've talked about before that, because they're just not as essential, not as overpowered as the ones we talked about before. So now let's move on and let's talk about the 3 elite cycles. The 3 cycles I discuss here I would consider not for beginning players. The quests are difficult, often frustrating, and therefore run the risk, if you're buying these cycles and introducing your friends to them, you may turn them off to the game entirely, because they are, in my opinion, not the best the game has to offer in terms of just fun. But they do have the most difficult quests in the game, and there are some unique ones. Now, if you've been watching my series of videos, you know that, of course, that I play a lot of the Outlands deck. And if you want to play the Outlands deck, then you have to have this expansion cycle. And you could elevate it quite a lot accordingly, because the Heirs of Numenor, the Steward's Sphere, and the Druidan Forest, the 3 on the right, these contain the Outland cards. They are absolutely, positively necessary to play Outlands, one of the most powerful archetypes in the game. And this is actually my recommendation for players who just want to buy cards so that you can build a powerful deck to play with your friends. They might tease you a bit for playing the most OP archetype in the game, at least most OP in my opinion, but if your goal is just to play with them and contribute and play something powerful, you can't go wrong with Outlands, and you're going to need Heirs of Numenor, the Steward's Sphere, and the Druidan Forest in order to make that deck, along with the Aristor Adventure Pack. But if you don't want to play Outlands, you can easily skip this whole cycle if your goal is just the player cards, to get the most powerful player cards. The Steward's Sphere is a very interesting kind of detective-focused quest. I like that quest a lot. It's difficult. But the other quests are just kind of meh. Heroes of Numenor brought us battle and siege questing. Those are not among my favorite mechanics. They're unique deck building challenges. It can be very frustrating, though, trying to build a deck that can do all of those things well. This is why I have this cycle among the 3 elite tiers, which I would consider not for beginning players. These are the more advanced tiers. And if you don't want to play Outlands, don't expect to get much in terms of the player cards in this expansion. Therefore, I would buy this expansion if you want a challenge, but also don't mind being frustrated. Because I found these quests frustrating, often challenging to play through. And therefore, they don't really enter into my repeat play cycle too much. The next of the elite cycles, the second most difficult in the game, in my opinion, is the Lost Realm cycle. This is the one that FFG decided to revise second after the core set. I would not consider this cycle for beginning players. It does have a fun synergy, that would be Dunedain, and so I certainly understand why you would revise this core set, and I hope all of the card sets do get revised editions with campaigns, because that adds to the game, and I'm very happy they're doing that. But I wouldn't recommend this for new players. Not one bit. Because, in particular, the Battle of Khazad-dum is one of the hardest in the game. I think if a player went from the revised core set to the revised Angmar Awakened cycle, that's what this cycle is, the Lost Realm cycle with the adventure packs is called the Angmar Awakened cycle. If a player went from the revised core set to the Angmar Awakened cycle, you might get the impression that this is a very, very difficult and frustrating game, and it certainly can be that, but it doesn't have to be that. You can introduce these cards to new players in a way that doesn't necessarily immediately lead to frustration. And that's what my recommendations are based on. I think if you start with some of the cycles that I recommended earlier in this video, you'll experience a more gentle difficulty curve than going from the revised core set to the Angmar Awakens revised cycle. That is pretty extreme difficulty, pretty extreme, progression difficulty. I would not recommend that for new players at all. The standouts in this cycle would be the Treachery of Rudaur, which has the hero version of Eristor, which is one of my favorite heroes, a very unique hero, and he unlocks many interesting and very powerful deck types, including the Outlands deck that I play a lot, and I play against some of the hardest quests in the game. And the Dread Realm, which contains the hero version of Arwen, which is a very, very powerful hero, one of the heroes used in C-Stan's 1 deck, along with Elrond and Tactics Eowyn. So those 2 adventure packs are standouts from the content of the player cards alone. But once again, if you buy this expansion, these adventure packs, expect to be challenged. I consider this the second most difficult cycle in the game, and therefore I would not recommend it for new players without building up your collection somewhat. I think if you go from the revised core set to the Angmar Awakens revised set, you will experience frustration and a not necessarily accurate view of what this game is. It is a very, very difficult game, there's no doubt about that. But the Escape from Dol Guldur and the Battle of Khazad-dum are among the top 3 most difficult quests in the game, and if you're experiencing those kind of first early in your adventures with the Lord of the Rings LCG, you may come to the conclusion that this game just isn't for you because it's insanely difficult and often frustrating. And while that is the case sometimes, it is certainly not always the case, and therefore I would not recommend this cycle, this expansion cycle, without building up the collection and without building up your skills and experience first. And the last cycle we're going to talk about is the most difficult cycle in the game, in my opinion, and that is A Shadow in the East cycle. These quests are very unique. and very, very challenging. In particular, Challenge of the Wain Riders requires a specific type of deck. It's a very unique and very fun quest. I do consider it worthwhile to buy this cycle and experience the quests. But it is last on the list because it is not suitable for new players at all. The challenge is extreme. The standouts from this cycle would be the A Shadow in the East expansion itself. And the reason I picked that is because of the hero in this expansion, the leadership version of Frodo, which I consider to be one of the strongest heroes in the game. I've used him quite a bit. That's a personal preference. I don't know that I've seen a lot of other players using him, but I really, really like him, and I really like the ally versions of Merry and Pippin in this expansion as well, and I really like the One Ring in this expansion, though to get the full value of the One Ring cards, unfortunately, you have to buy other adventure packs. But I really like Leadership Frodo, the hero version, Merry and Pippin, and the One Ring. It's very fun, very thematic. That's why I'm recommending A Shadow in the East. I wouldn't consider it must-have. Treachery of Rudour and the Dread Realm, by the way, I would consider must-have for the cards, not necessarily for the quests due to their high difficulty. But I really, really like those heroes, Eristor and Arwen. A Shadow in the East I would not consider must-have. Fun, thematic, yes. Not necessarily must-have. Under the Ash Mountains, this contains Gildor, hero version of Gildor, which is one of the best heroes in the game. He's very powerful. And the Fortress of Nirn, while in the top 4 most difficult quests in the game with Mount Doom, Escape from Dol Guldur, and the Battle of Cairn Doom, it contains the card Bond of Friendship, which unlocks a new archetype, the 4-hero archetype, which is the most powerful archetype in the game, in my opinion. That's why I'm singling out the Fortress of Nirn here. Challenge of the Wain Riders is a very fun quest, but not particularly good cards, and it's a very challenging quest. In fact, all of the quests in this cycle are fun and very, very challenging. But in particular, A Shadow in the East contains fun and thematic Hobbit cards. Under the Ash Mountains contains a very powerful hero. And the Fortress of Nirn contains the contract Bond of Friendship, which unlocks the most powerful archetype in the game. One that's important for playing against Nightmare quests. If that's one of your goals as a player, I would consider the Fortress of Nirn a must-have adventure pack for that reason. This is the most difficult cycle in the game, in my opinion, and therefore the least suitable for new players. So hopefully that will help anybody who is getting into the game and feels a bit overwhelmed by the number of choices available to buy, and it's perhaps wondering which of these are necessary and which of these are not, which would this person consider the best, the most worth buying. This is my opinion. It is only my opinion, and certainly you will see opinions from other players. You may see some players who feel the Lost Realm expansion was the perfect cycle to have released second in its revised edition, and that new players will have no trouble going from the core set to the Angmar Awakens cycle. I would consider that ridiculous myself, but you see all kinds of different opinions out there, so take my opinions with a very large grain of salt. But hopefully this will be helpful, and if not helpful, at least entertaining. So thank you for watching.